You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynne Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday the 28th of September. This man raped and murdered and was set free to rape again twice. Whilst Mrs Walker receives the full fury of the system. John Terry faces politically correct wrath as well. Report from Nick Griffin MEP, Muslim sexual grooming from the Times to the Sun. Plane heading for Everest crashes killing 19 people. Man behind anti-Muslim film is jailed for probation violation. Thought for the day, problems or solutions? And finally, a fishy problem or a digital one? UK news. There is something very wrong with our justice system, not necessarily with the police, but the judiciary and the parole boards. Kenneth Mark Shirley, 42, has just received 16 life sentences on top of the 7 he is already serving for the rape of Helen Stockford in 2009 and the murder of Mary Wainwright in 1987. Mr Justice Astill added to the life sentences for the degrading and violent rape of an unnamed woman in her home 7 years ago. He was only at liberty from the first row of life sentences because he was released from prison on licence 3 times by the parole board. Avon and Somerset Probation Trust defended its management of Shirley and said he had not posed an increased level of risk and there was no suggestion it could have done anything to prevent him from reoffending. Helen Stockford, who gave up her anonymity in 2009, said strong lessons needed to be learnt by the authorities who repeatedly freed him. Again, Shirley has shown that he is a highly dangerous individual who has total disregard for the terms of his life sentence, she said. He's already broken it 3 times and now a 4th with his current case. I believe the justice system in this country needs a complete overhaul, particularly with respect to victims of rape, and that's what I've been campaigning for 3 long years. A World at 8 spokesperson said, well, if he has not been released 3 times, he would not have been free to commit more crimes. His original crime of murder should have resulted in the death penalty. Failing that, castration. Apparently his last victim was so traumatised she still cannot function. His modus operandi is to degrade his victims with knives and other penetrative objects. Lovely. This man should never have seen the light of day, even in our current do-goody system. My sympathy is with these women and Miss Stockport. So whilst murderers, rapists and Muslim clerics blossom in the courts, Mrs Walker from Fareham, of the anti-Muslim sexual grooming leaflet fame, received a full and indefinite ASBO and costs awarded against her from the Matrix chambers of Cherry Blair of £5,000, brought down from £20,000. It seems the law is biased against women and white elderly women, and if they point the people towards the British National Party website and mention Nick Griffin or anything about the facts of Muslim grooming, even though it is all over the Times this week like a rash, although very muddied, the book of the magistrates will weigh exceeding heavy. We are still fighting in her corner though, and we have right on our side, so the end is not yet nigh. Although John Terry resigned his captaincy with Chelsea, he faces a bill of over £770,000 following his criminal trial and the cherry on the PC cake, the FA hearing, which went ahead after he had resigned. In absentia, Terry was suspended for 4 games and fined £220,000 for racially abusing Anton Ferdinand in a Premier match last season, although he was acquitted of this so-called crime in a court hearing on July the 13th this year. The legal costs battling these criminal charges for both the court and the FA hearing amount to £750,000, and he will try to recoup £400,000 from the court case, it was reported in the Sun. He is also liable to pay the cost of the ridiculous FA hearing, which are reported to be around £200,000. It is clear that racially motivated crimes are big business to the legals and their cohorts. A World at 8 spokesperson commented, "It'll be a good day for Britain when the Human Rights Bill is repealed. Then these vultures will not make money out of a nonsense." Now I hand you over to Nick Griffin, MEP, for his Friday report. Today he covers the Muslim sexual grooming scandals which are spread to the Sun newspaper. Over to you, Nick.
Here's something that appeared in the Sun yesterday. For more than a decade this has gone on. I'm no fan of the British National Party because I hate racism, but the BNP was warning about this back in 2001. And what happened? Its leader was arrested and charged with inciting racial hatred. People feel they cannot trust the establishment, and they begin to look beyond the establishment for a bit of help. It may hurt to say it. It may be politically inconvenient. It may stick in the throat. But the BNP was right about this issue. The issue, of course, is Muslim grooming gangs preying on our girls, and the words are those of Rod Liddell, writing in his column in The Sun yesterday. Of course, the obligatory ritual condemnation is galling nonsense, but we mustn't let it distract us from the full significance of the meat of Liddell's piece. Despite the continuing, well-deserved decline in newspaper circulation, The Sun still has an enormous print run and an even bigger readership, both online and in the hundreds of thousands of copies that are read by several dozen people each on building sites, in cafes, barbershops, and so on. So literally millions of people will have seen that first ever admission in the mainstream media that we were right all along about Muslim grooming gangs and about the despicable failure of the police, social services, and the political elite to protect tens of thousands of vulnerable young girls. At the same time, with a report on the sickening scale of the scandal in Rotherham being joined today by the equally damning detail of events in Rochdale, public awareness about the whole thing is now higher than ever. This means that other cases will now start to come to light. The police and the authorities will now find it harder to brush it all under the carpet. The pretense that the multiracial experiment has produced some sort of utopian new society, rather than an unmitigated disaster that's now a ticking time bomb of communal and religious tensions, can no longer be maintained with a shred of credibility. That won't stop the BBC, in particular, regurgitating its tired old multicult propaganda, but it does make them look ever more out of touch and ridiculous. So it doesn't really matter that today the Daily Mail makes the absurd and thoroughly dishonest claim that its Sue Reed first exposed the scandal, when we all know that I was twice put in the dock to face up to 7 years in prison for exposing it, while Ms. Reed and the Daily Mail were turning the blindest of blind eyes to my warning and to my plea for recognition of the problem and justice for the victim. It doesn't matter that Andrew Norfolk of the Times sat in on both my trials, but waited another 3 years before he and his paper started to campaign on the issue. Yes, this is unjust too, but at least the iron curtain of PC silence has been torn down. At least the issue is now out in the open. We have won the argument about what's happening, so now we can move on to fight to get something done to stop it for good. It's a commonplace of history and politics that totalitarian regimes are at their most vulnerable, not when in the full flow of repression and confident propaganda about 5-year plans and the wonders of their brave new world, but when they start to backtrack and try to reform and say they're going to listen to the people. And that, as I'm sure you've already realised, is where we are right now with the thoroughly totalitarian multicult. I was out on Wednesday with a team of local activists in the centre of Burnley, launching our campaign for an independent public inquiry into the grooming scandal. Of course, I expected a good response, but even I was surprised by the extent to which the weary resignation and head-in-the-sands avoidance of the issue that was all too common a few years ago are now being replaced by real anger. Anger not just at the Muslim criminal gangs, but particularly at the portrayal by the authorities who have let them get away with it for so long. An even more remarkable sign of the changing mood was that, in the space of about an hour and a half, our stall in the shopping precinct was approached by no fewer than 5 women, who were either the victims or the mums or grandmothers of the victims of grooming. Each of them separately told exactly the same story of official neglect, social services cowardice, and the inverted anti-white racism of the politically correct police. 2 of them in particular told us things so harrowing that it was hard to listen to them without crying. What monsters are the wretched, smug, out-of-touch elite let loose in our poor betrayed land, on our poor betrayed people. The problem is 30 years old, but the anger and the number of people now finding the courage to speak out about it are new. Gang grooming is ceasing to be merely a scandal, it's becoming a crisis. If the powers that be continue with their cover-ups and their institutionalised neglect of the victims and of the communities which are still under systematic assault by Muslim gangs for whom sexual predation, anti-white racist aggression and drug pushing are a way of life and a form of punk jihad, then the whole lot will go up in flames. To prevent such an explosion, we need, urgently, a full independent public inquiry in which the high-profile invited presence of the British National Party is allowed to reassure the public that it's not just another pardon the pun, whitewash. And we need action, ruthless action by the police and the courts, to arrest and jail the gangs who are out there raping 12 and 13-year-old girls right now, tonight, and tomorrow night, and night after night, in scores of towns and city suburbs. Prison is too good for these swine, but at least it will be a start. There is an equally urgent need for effective action by schools to warn and educate the 10 and 11-year-old girls who are even now coming into the abusers' twisted sights as new targets. I believe that the independent public inquiry is something that really could happen now, but it won't happen unless we push for it, and it won't be really independent unless we agitate and fight for it. Yet here, at last, is a major step forward that we really can make happen, a campaign to make a real difference that we can win. That's why I was pleased to launch our public inquiry campaign out on the streets of Burnley, in the heart of my constituency, on behalf of the people whose votes made me an MEP, speaking out for them. And it's why I'm asking you to take part too. You can start this evening, right now, by writing to your local newspaper about the scandal and, without necessarily naming me or the BNP, demanding an independent public inquiry into the grooming crisis. Then you can contact your local organiser and push him to phone our dispatch department right away to order the tabletop display skirt, petitions, leaflets and placards that we produced for this campaign. Let's get to work to secure justice for those girls and punish the political elite who let them down. You see, it isn't enough to be right on this subject. It's not even enough to be recognised as having been right, as we have been in the Sun this week. Now we have to go on and work to turn that recognition into solid support in the ballot boxes and into a stronger organisation. These aren't things that will just happen automatically. We have to get out there and redouble our efforts to make them happen. Time is of the essence. We must strike again and again while the iron is hot. We really are making progress on this already. In the last few months, we've come a long way in re-establishing our position as the only real nationalist game in town. At the Question Time for Patriots we held this week in Liverpool, and over in Essex, we're seeing good people who were distracted and misled into the now nearly bankrupt Muslim candidate standing English Democrats coming back home to the British National Party, where they truly belong. Following our decisive victory in coming best of the rest in last month's council by-election in Burnley, the National Front has shelved plans for further electioneering efforts in our Northern Heartland areas. We have a lot of work to do to get back to winning elections, but at least the way ahead is once again uncluttered. The Zionist EDL of Tommy Robinson seems to be in terminal meltdown, with more and more of the serious and thoroughly decent rank-and-file patriots who the English Defence League mobilised in its brief heyday, now declaring their willingness to work with us on future campaigns, particularly local grassroots grooming awareness actions. We all know that the troubles we went through over our now past 2 years of hell were coordinated and funded as part of a concerted Europe-wide effort to knock us true nationalists out of the game. The aim was to replace us all with a tame, one-track model nationalism that would oppose Islamisation, but would also support multiculturalism and neocon wars, and refrain from criticising the banking swindle or the corporate looting of our national commonwealth through corrupt privatisation deals. Here in Britain at least, that bid has failed. Real principled nationalism is alive and well in our British National Party. We have survived and more. We haven't gone away, we're here to stay and here to fight. Our finances are healthy and transparent, and our accounts are both fair and on time. Morale is high, we're moving ahead again. Our time is coming and, together, we're going to be ready.
Many thanks, Nick, for that input. World news. It has been reported that a plane heading for the Everest region crashed within minutes from takeoff from Kathmandu, killing all 19 people on board, including 7 Britons. Officials say the plane, run by Sita Air, crashed into a riverbank and caught fire. There were 16 passengers and 3 crew, including the 7 Britons. The UK Foreign Office has said the British are among the dead, but has not confirmed just how many. A World-Date reporter has commented, "It may seem awful, but I just wondered if Joanna Lumley was making that journey back to her adopted birthplace." It has been reported from Los Angeles by Reuters that a man, Nakula Baseli Nakula, 55, who has been linked to the anti-Islam film The Innocence of Muslims, was jailed without bond for violation of terms of his probation on a bank fraud conviction. He was apparently under investigation by probation officials who were looking into whether he had violated the terms of his 2011 release from jail on a bank fraud conviction whilst making the film. As a condition of his release, he was banned from accessing the internet, etc. Nakula, a Coptic Christian living in a Los Angeles suburb, circulated the film online, which shows Muhammad as a fool and a sexual deviant. A World-Date writer comments, "If the cap fits, wear it." This man, although not blameless, is a Christian Copt, and they have been persecuted by Islam and the Muslims for generations. A bit of payback doesn't hurt at all. He may have a point. One has to be open-minded over all religions, and isn't Islam a peaceful, open-minded religion, as we are taught? Thought for the day: problems or solutions? I do hope that by talking about the problems that we face in the world, I'm not doing the opposite of what I intend. I intend to bring to the surface several of the many wrongs around that could be changed and would be by the right governments and the right mindset. Now, it is well known that many people, and I mean many, do not want to think of nasty goings on. In fact, it has been proved that people who are subjected to facts they do not like go into mental hibernation, or in the case of the English, their homes and whatever hobbies or habits they adopt. Other countries protest and demonstrate, but not us. It's not my intention to send my listeners scurrying off and hiding, but I can understand the premise of doing just that. Who wants to go to bed thinking of the countries and the world's problems? No one in their right mind. Quite often, if I cannot sleep, I just lie there and think, and then I cannot stop thinking, so I understand the problem. This saying by Michael Shermer says it all. Smart people believe weird things because they're skilled at defending beliefs they arrived at for non-smart reasons. And if you read about conspiracy theories and how they come about, you will see this is what the mind does with unwelcome information. It shuts down or makes alternative information. On that subject we could go on all day and night, as that information effectively obliterates any possibility of worldwide conspiracy groups. But then we know they exist, whether in Bilderberg form or simply corporate Zionism or even the Illuminati, I do not know. However, I would not be doing anyone a service if I did not talk about certain things and the very relevant problems that they bring. I also do talk about solutions, and there is a solution to every problem. That is the nature of life. So get depressed or angry, but in doing so, realise at least you have the freedom at the moment to do something about it. Many have not. I'm going to touch on a few problems swirling round in my old barnet today, including the lovely bright thought that seems to be sweeping the civilised world, that there could be war between Iran and Israel, and indeed everyone. Several people have said to me words like, well, it could be all taken out of our hands, etc., meaning the bugbears of massive immigration, foreign aid, our lack of education systems, our international health service and everything else. Well, yes, it could be, but here are a few thoughts. I believe that everyone should have a country of their own, for their own, and with a few exceptions, stay in them. Now this means that the Jewish people should have their own country as well. Now Islam occupies most of the countries in the Middle East. Fact. Iran may or may not have nuclear weapons, but it does have nuclear potential. Iran also makes no secret of the fact that it wants to obliterate Israel and all in that country. Incidentally, why does no one object to that phrasing? If we in the West said we wanted to blow Mecca off the face of the earth, I'm sure there would be numerous objections to it, both formal and informal. Now, I'm not pro-Zionist, but could any country stand by and watch the total destruction of a country by another, as technically the Jews have not invaded Iran? Could we as a nation take part in a level of appeasement way past that of Chamberlain with the Third Reich? Could we really let Islam take out a country that contains the roots of the most of the Western world's religions, Christianity, which is based on the life and preachings of Jesus, who was a Jew from the house of David? Israel contains Jerusalem, the holy city, holy to Jews and Christians. Apart from the conversion of most Arabs to Islam, to my knowledge, Jerusalem should mean nothing to the Muslims, because as far as I know, Muhammad never went there. Their territory is Mecca and Medina, not Jerusalem. How would the Catholics take to the Vatican being bombed by Iran? Would they consider it that a sacrifice worth making to save the world from further attacks? Everyone knows that if a country can bomb one country, it can bomb another country, and cook up many excuses to do so. So, Israel is gone, Iran is king of Islam's shitting pot, and the Russians and Chinese are still sabre-rattling. The Arab world will have lost their scapegoat in Israel and will make America the next target, even if they do nothing retaliatory. Poor old America will be in the firing line because their Jews and Christians will be expendable as well. In the face of Muslim aggression, the West is always wrong, isn't it? On the other foot, we could bomb Iran first to prevent a full-scale nuclear war. Then of course we would have the world of Islam up in arms for Western aggression. The unbelievable thing is that I believe the world in general would rather see Israel go and Islam appeased than take Iran out of the picture, despite the rantings of their president and their ayatollahs. By the time we have convinced ourselves of the New World Order and US Zionist arms dealers making money out of all the unnecessary wars, which they do, as indeed we do in the UK, we would be patting ourselves on the back, wouldn't we? Well, take time to think. If that happens, that will be the end of life as we know it. And I do not even mean full nuclear war. What is the power of world domination when there's no world to dominate? These powers that be are anything but stupid. They've been filling up people with misinformation for hundreds of years. We in the Western world are especially dominated by that, and do you remember what I said at the beginning about people's reaction to bad information? They either sidestep it or invent another scenario. Do not think for a minute that Israel would be the lamb on the sacrificial altar of the world for Islamic revenge against the mistakes of fighting on foreign shores and backing a small new country against a few sheep herders. It will not work out that way at all. I think I'm going to wait for the second coming and the Antichrist, who, as they battle it out on their homeland, can wipe Islam off the face of the earth as far as I'm concerned, and all who sail in it. As I say, I'm not pro-Zionist in any way, but I am pro-human. And just as I believe that Muslims should have their designated countries to themselves, albeit as far away from me as possible, I also believe that the Jews should have their own country as well and live without fear in such. Looking at the roots of Judaism, Christianity and Islam, they all stem from the Judaic root of Abraham and the land that is now Israel. People must return to their own lands and make good in those lands. My thought for the world today is peace is never free and freedom is seldom peaceful. And finally, a true case of guess what? A human finger was found in a trout being cleaned by a fisherman, Nolan Calvin, in Bonner County, Idaho. He placed the digit on ice and rang the sheriff's office. Detectives there were able to obtain a fingerprint and matched it to Hans Galassi, 31. On contacting Hans, or rather no Hans, they were told he'd lost 4 fingers in an accident in June on the same lake that the fish was caught. The 3 other fingers have not been recovered. Hans was offered the finger back but declined. I have to say it now, and I will. This was a true case of fish fingers. You've been listening to The World at 8. I'm Lynne Mozart, and I and the team at World at 8 and Radio Britain wish you all a very happy and a very safe weekend. Oxford in 2009 and the murder of Mary Wainwright in 1987. Mr Justice Astill added to the life sentences for the degrading and violent rape of an unnamed woman in her home 7 years ago. He was only at liberty from the first row of life sentences because he was released from prison on licence 3 times by the parole board. Avon and Somerset Probation Trust defended its management of Shirley and said he had not posed an increased level of risk and there was no suggestion it could have done anything to prevent him from reoffending. Helen Stockford, who gave up her anonymity in 2009, said strong lessons needed to be learnt by the authorities who repeatedly freed him. Again, Shirley has shown that he is a highly dangerous individual who has total disregard for the term. My sympathy is with these women and Miss Stockport. So whilst murderers, rapists and Muslim clerics blossom in the courts, Mrs Walker from Fareham of the anti-Muslim sexual grooming leaflet fame received a full and indefinite ASBO and costs awarded against her from the Matrix chambers of Cherry Blair of £5,000, brought down from £20,000. It seems the law is biased against women, white women and white elderly women, and if they point the people towards the British National Party website and mention Nick Griffin or anything about the facts of Muslim grooming, even though it is all over the Times this week like a rash, although very muddied, the book of the magistrates will weigh exceeding.
You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynne Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday the 28th of September. This man raped and murdered and was set free to rape again twice. Whilst Mrs Walker receives the full fury of the system. John Terry faces politically correct wrath as well. Report from Nick Griffin, MEP, in terms of his life sentence, she said. He's already broken it 3 times and now a 4th with his current case. I believe the justice system in this country needs a complete overhaul, particularly with respect to victims of rape, and that's what I've been campaigning for 3 long years. A World at 8 spokesperson said, well, if he has not been released 3 times, he would not have been free to commit more crimes. His original crime of murder should have resulted in the death penalty. Failing that, castration. Apparently his last victim was so traumatised she still cannot function. His modus operandi is to degrade his victims with knives and other penetrative objects. Lovely. This man should never have seen the light of day, even in our current do-goody system. Muslim sexual grooming, from the Times to the Sun. Plane heading for Everest crashes, killing 19 people. Man behind anti-Muslim film is jailed for probation violation. Thought for the day, problems or solutions? And finally, a fishy problem or a digital one? UK news. There's something very wrong with our justice system, not necessarily with the police, but the judiciary and the parole boards. Kenneth Mark Shirley, 42, has just received 16 life sentences on top of the 7 he is already serving for the rape of Helen